Hello and welcome to another episode of Property Ponderings. I'm Craig Nicol from Nicol Buyer Advisory in Melbourne, Australia. And this is the podcast where we try to dig deep on some property topics to ponder. And today we have a returning guest, Shane Neaves from Hutton Financial. He's a financial planner and advisor, and they also do some mortgage broking work. So I thought they'd be ideal to get on for our chat today about property and how property investors or property buyers in general build up financial wealth over the long term, but also just talking about anything and everything really with financial planning so that people can get ahead.
Yep.
So welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Brilliant. It's good to have you back. You were cracking a few jokes last time on the pod, and they've been appreciated by a few of the viewers.
Clipped most of them, but
a
few made it in there.
I actively clipped out most of your jokes, yes, but a few of them slipped in on some of the short videos. So feel free to throw a few more jokes.
Today.
Keeping it serious. Okay. All right. I appreciate that. We're going to start. First question. Get things going. All right. First question is, what role do financial planners play in regards to property investment and home ownership?
Great question. We've got a role depending on where you come to us. So a first home buyer is going to have very different requirements compared to a property upgrader that might have one or two children looking to upgrade their home versus someone at the other end who's owned a home, a family home potentially for 20 years. They're getting retirement. They might have a large asset that they're wondering what to do with. They could be asset rich and cash poor, or just looking to build their super balance and downsize. So there's a couple of different things. So depending on where you sit on that spectrum, Our advice would differ, essentially.
Yeah.
So first home buyers, maybe most common, it's looking at budget. So budget, I'd say, is probably the most important thing. The difference between what the bank will lend you and what you can afford maybe gets lost on some people sometimes. So if I was sitting in front of a couple and they said, we spoke to a bank, or we've entered our details in, and they said that we can borrow $1.2 million because they've both got good incomes, and you go, great, okay, that sounds good. How much are you saving at the moment? We're not saving anything. Okay, how much is your rent at the moment? Our rent is $4,000 a month. Yeah. So the new repayments are going to be circa $7,000. Yeah. Where's the extra $3 coming from? We hadn't thought of it. So what the bank will lend you and what you can afford are two different things, and we try and help people. I suppose no matter where you are when you're buying a house, it's to make sure that they align and they fit.
Yeah. So just restructuring their finances in general.
It could be a restructure. It could be hey, you actually can't afford this, or it could be, well, you've got all this income. The bank, and it comes down to HEM. The bank are lending potentially off HEM, and the assessment that they've come to us was on HEM. So if your HEM is a household expenditure monthly, and it's indexed to income, so the more you earn, the more you spend generally, up to a point.
Yeah.
So the bank might be saying, well, we'll assess your expenses at $5,000, and that's what they've gone and done in the calculator, but they're actually spending $8,000. So that's where the $3,000 gets lost. So it could be going, hey, HEM is here, $5,000, you're spending $8,000. Where's the $3,000? And it could be trying to find that $3,000, and we might only find $2,000, and then they go, okay, well, maybe we can't borrow 1.2, we can only borrow $1 million. So it's working those things out, which then fall into borrowing capacity, max purchase, what your deposit is. So all the things that a broker might help with. There's some non-cash things that we'd help with as well. So if you're looking, let's say you're currently living in Northcote in Melbourne, catching a tram into the city for work, or the train, or you might ride. We will now want our family home in Eltham, out of North, or it could be, I'm going to use Eltham, it's a pretty good example. Hurstbridge, or out of suburbs, let's say Wollert, Doreen, could be as far as Wallen, God help you. But you then potentially, if it's a family particularly, they need 2 cars. So we're looking at that going, okay, yes, housing's cheaper out there and you can get more house, but for you to get to the city or wherever you work, you're going to need to run two vehicles. So vehicle might cost 10, 12 grand a year.
Yeah.
That 10 or 12 grand a year, if you moved somewhere in a more expensive house, closer to the city or public transport, translates to an extra 200 grand in borrowing capacity. Yeah. So you might be better off going, you know what, we didn't want to take on the extra debt, the $200,000 difference, but if we only need one car, then we can take the money from that car, put it towards the home, and spend more on a home. So you end up in the same position.
Yeah.
So it's coming through things like that. Some people say, I want to buy close to work because they currently work in Bayswater. But that might not be a forever job. How long are you planning on working there? I'm looking for something else actually at the moment. So let's not tie our home to where we work.
Yeah.
Let's be practical around it. So there's the financial aspect, but there's also the lifestyle aspect where we can provide advice.
Yeah. Okay. So it's really just you're sitting in front of a client and they've got their own life that they want, and you're just trying to help them
Get there. Yeah,
to basically get there.
Yep.
And you're raising things like that. The location thing's interesting. I'm sure a lot of people probably don't think about that and the cost.
The cost of
difference.
car. I'm a one-car family, and that's purely based on that. So we spent more on a house because we would only need one car, and if my wife is from the Diamond Valley, which is a bit of a black hole. Everyone wants to go back to the Diamond Valley. But for us to go to the Diamond Valley, it's to be a two-car scenario, which then keep the same mortgage but throw an extra car in actually costs us an extra $15,000 potentially after tax.
Yeah.
Now, so you've got to factor that in. So it might be, okay, we can buy a cheaper house because we need an extra car, whereas at the moment you can spend more because you don't need that extra car.
Yeah.
So that's just one example of... depending on the person, I mean, you sit in front of someone, there's lots of things that come up. It could be kids. Okay, we just want an inner city apartment because we love the lifestyle and we want to be close to bars and restaurants. And it's like, okay, but that's for how long? Are you planning on having kids? If you are, how many? Okay, if you've got a 2-bedroom apartment, you're probably not going to... Yeah, you might have a baby in there at the start, but once they start moving around, you're going to want more room. And so maybe it's worth taking on a little bit more extra debt, moving a little bit further out. A classic example I'd say is, instead of buying an apartment in Northcote, can you get maybe a house in Reservoir? Is not comparable anymore. It used to be, but maybe it could be the next suburb out, Thomastown, and you go, okay, now you've got land, you've got room to grow, you'll probably get better capital growth as well. Yes, I know it's not as close to bars and things as you want, but let's look past the next 2 years of your life and look towards 5, 6, 7.
Yeah. And I guess there's a bit of crossover there with clients that I have as well. So you're financially planning out their sort of move and then talking about what's a better option in the long term in regards to their wealth.
It's a balancing act too, because I'm the same person who's like close to the amenities, but instead of buying just a little bit further out and maybe getting land, and I suppose that's the main thing that we'd be telling people is I know it's an old cliche, but land appreciates, building depreciate.
Yeah.
So it's trying to buy as much land. Generally, our advice is try and buy as much land as close to the city as you can.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been good advice for a long period of time, and COVID maybe changed that a little bit with regional buying and things like that. But I still think, looking long term, we've got a lot of people coming to Melbourne. They're going to want to live close, and most people want to live with some land.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. And so I guess if we're coming back to the general financial planning journey for people, a lot of these conversations happening because they're coming through as mortgage clients, or are there a lot of first home buyers or people in general coming, look, we're about to purchase a home, but we want to plan things out?
Both. So it'd be both. So I had a meeting yesterday and it was, hey, we've got 2 houses. We've got 2 investment properties we're renting. We want to buy a house here close to schools, where we want to spend the next 5 to 10 years. What's the best strategy? Are we selling this, refinancing this? So it's then working out which property you might keep. Is there one to sell? Are you better off just renting in that spot and keep the properties that you've got?
Yeah.
So we're looking at all those things. What's the uprise of the potential uplift in the existing properties versus the one that you're going to buy in that location? All of those things then come into play. So that's not have a meeting and then it's finished. It's normally a lifestyle question where you're going, okay, what's the plan here? What do you want to do? Do you think that you're going to be in this property for 5, 10, 20 years?
Yeah.
You've got other things like CGT that come in, potential capital gains tax on the existing investment properties. managing those. Then it brings in a superannuation potentially.
So this all works in with the accountant as well with the tax side of things, or do you do estimates on that?
Well, we would do estimates, but we would always send them to our accountant just because we don't have visibility on depreciation and other things that we don't know about.
Yeah.
But we would say, look, as a rough guide, this is how it looks. Let's firm it up with the accountant. I think you had Sam Geelings in here the other day, so we might send them to someone like Sam if they don't have an accountant. Go and get these fleshed out, confirmed, and then we'll come back and but you can get a pretty good idea of what the gain is going to be from an initial discussion.
Yeah, I guess most people would have a fairly simple structure.
They know what they paid for. They know what they paid for the property. They know when they paid for it. Are they eligible for the general discount of 50%? Yes, there's some other things that will come into that, but you get a pretty good idea up front. So there, that might be, in that scenario, yes, so that was, hey, we've actually got properties, we just want to know what to do.
Yeah.
What's going to be the best thing for us moving forward?
Yeah.
Yep.
Very good. And I know we've spoken a little bit about younger first-home buyers already, and I guess the property side of things. But if you've got people coming in as first-home buyers and they're wanting some financial planning, what sort of other asset types or other asset types are involved in that conversation, and how do you sort of work?
That is an interesting one, and it comes down to the person. So you might say, I had a 24-year-old in the office the other day, and he already had an investment property. He's still living with mum and dad. Had an investment property, rent vesting, I suppose.
Yeah.
Got into the market early. Good advice from his parents, I think, to buy a property early. He has a good income. Get started as quickly as possible, which is always a good idea.
Yeah.
But he was like, hey, and he had large cash savings as well. Do I buy another house? He's single, no prospect of kids in the next, on his radar anyway. So what does he
knows
do?
About,
He knows about, so what does he do? And we ended up, so the discussion is what's my next step? And we said, well, what are you actually trying to achieve? Is it, I want to retire early? And he basically just said, I want to do what you think is the best thing for me to build wealth over the long term. So I'm not trying to make $1 million in the next 5 years. And we ended up working out that it was actually using his carried forward contributions. He did have a high salary.
Yeah.
So he ended up putting as a 24-year-old 83,000 into super.
Yeah.
80 odd thousand into super, gets the tax deduction to reduce his taxable income, and his super balance, our goal at 24 is to try and get it by 25 to 200 grand.
Yeah. Okay.
And then from that point on, if a 25-year-old, he doesn't need to do a lot right from that point on if he's got 200 grand in super at age 25. Like, you compound that out over a long period of time and it's a wealthy person.
Yeah.
So that again, that's a long-term decision, because you can't access that for him another 35 years, potentially even longer.
Yeah,
so
exactly,
he's thinking long-term, what's going to be best for me long-term, and it is get as many assets as possible as early as possible and compound them out. So that was a smart move that we thought, hey, if you do this early and let compounding do the work, you can almost go, I don't need to make additional contributions to super later in life, and I can direct those to a mortgage with kids and things like that. So it's take a sacrifice now to maybe ease cash flow pressure in the future.
Down the track. Yeah. Put the cash in while he's got it coming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we didn't drain his cash flow. He still had other cash. So
And so what about other clients, though, that are maybe not in a position where they've got big incomes yet, and they're thinking about buying a house, but they're trying to get into other asset types? What are sort of some options or discussions that you go through there?
So that is and timing, because then you look at timing market risk. So if you're saving for a house and you think, okay, I've got 12 months, and you've been saving in shares and property, and no, not property, unless it's a real estate investment trust, but let's just assume that it's shares.
Yeah.
And Trump's been elected. I don't think it's going to be terrible for the economy, but who knows what happens? Let's say the economy turns and markets come down. Yep. You had 50 grand save and markets come off 20,000. That's a lot. That's a large portion of your deposit. So if you were planning on using that in 12 months, markets might not be the best place for you to save that money. Purely because of the risk that the risk inherent in investing in shares. So we might say, hey, we might sacrifice 10, potentially 20 if you look at markets over the last 12 months, 20% return, but for the safety or capital preservation of asset, we might go and look at something else like a fixed interest, maybe a bond, another safer investment. It could be private debt at the moment is popular, the right private debt, not some things getting around, but other investments that are still yielding really well because interest rates are high, so they're getting a good yield, but they're also much safer.
So there are options though in that scenario for people to not just use a savings account.
100%, definitely, yes.
Yeah. To get a better return.
100%, yep.
Yeah.
So obviously if you're in an ADI, an Australian bank account, then you get the government guarantee for $250,000, but this would be outside of those. But still, it's in the bank you're going to get maybe max 5%, so you'd be looking to trying to get something a little bit more attractive, while still managing risk.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
All right. So with first-time buyers, are there some strategies that you have for a person that has bought a property and they're trying to manage those mortgage repayments, about how they're dealing with their finances at that particular point in time? Number one, cash flow. Cash flow is king. So getting your cash flow tight and knowing where your money's going, that's probably the thing. It's funny that when people, you see two things. When people are saving for a house, they are, and when they're good savers, they know exactly how much they're going to save per week or per month or per fortnight, usually linked to their pay cycle, and they're quite diligent in it. Pay yourself first, spend what's left, and they can build up a deposit really quickly. And, well, not really, depending on how much their incomes are or not, but you can get quite consistent with your savings. But then when we find they buy a house, that discipline disappears and they don't keep the same mindset. And then they're like, all right, my mortgage repayment is $3,000 a month, and that's all I have to do. And they might have been saving 4 or 5 previously, but then they shift and they're like, okay, now I only have to pay $3,000, and the rest sort of just leaks away into discretionary spend. It could be down the shops or whatever it is. It disappears. So it's trying to keep that mindset of the disciplined approach. And yes, I've flicked over and now I'm a homeowner, but and that's the minimum repayment, but let's see what additional funds we can make and still try and manage our money in the same manner that we were previously, because it held us in good stead. You don't just then want to flip over and then you make your minimum and the money just leaks out from there, which is probably the most common thing that we see. So we use a bucket approach. So pay it into a hub account, try and spend a certain amount of money. We work out what that is per week. That gets automatically transferred. There's some discretionary spend to a different account. You might have a separate groceries account, but those are the accounts that you worry about. And if you get a pay rise, if your loan repayment drops because rates come down, that savings the savings are held in your surplus funds as opposed to just spent out. So it sort of locks in what you are spending every week, and then it forces, as you speak to most people and you say, oh, my income's gone from 60 to 80 or 100 to 120. Well, where'd the money go? What'd you do with the difference? I don't know. And they don't know because it just disappears. You've stopped watching it.
You've stopped watching it and it's just been absorbed in your living expenses. But if you know that you spend $40,000 per annum and it's linked weekly and it's every week it comes out of your account, you might get paid monthly, you set up weekly, then the $10,000 that you get in a bonus or a pay rise, it doesn't just get spent automatically because you're still doing the same scheme. So it forces you to be conscious in your choices of what am I spending my money in, and you might even say, you know what, if you're looking for the long term, maybe I make that as an additional repayment to my home loan. Maybe when I get the $10,000 pay rise, maybe I direct that straight to super. Maybe I buy shares with that. Maybe I buy crypto with that. We can't provide advice on that, but they make a conscious decision of, okay, what do I want to do with that surplus funds so that it doesn't, your bottle of wine choice doesn't go from 20 to 30, from 30 to 40, or you go out for dinner an extra night a week, or, it just disappears in life, which is easy to do. Yeah, absolutely. And with that system as well, do you recommend they use certain different banks or systems? We normally say 2 banks. So we use the 2 banks. So Bank A, Bank B. Bank B is the one that you see. So you don't even look at the Bank A because that's your bills in the hub account, everything comes out automatically. You just worry about what's happening in Bank B, and that's the auto transfer that you get every week and every month for your discretionary spend. That's what you're focused on. And most people, I know some people hate budgeting. It's not so much as saying you living super frugally. It's just that you're choosing what you're spending your money on. So you might still say, I'm going out for dinner twice a week and I'm going to the pub on Friday night. You can still do that, but it's just about being consistent and going and planning what you're doing. So it's this is what I want to do, great, and making a conscious decision of what it is. And you might not go one Friday night and then go Friday, Saturday the following week. Like it's just being consistent.
Yeah.
So with property prices and interest rates constantly shifting, what would you say are the top financial habits or practices people should adopt to weather these changes and stay on track with their goals?
Well, that pretty much feeds straight into the question, what we just were talking about. So there's the managing your cash flow, because if rates go up, hopefully you've got a buffer in. So if rates go up, you've already built in a buffer. And remember, banks build in their 3%. Their 3% sensitivity. So they might be lending to you at 6, but they're for their models, they're checking you at 9.
Yeah.
So they think you can afford it. So it's making sure that you also can afford it. But then also not looking at the difference, I suppose, between the property market and the share market is you can see the price of a share every day. It's listed, it's available, you know what it is. If it moves 5%, you know about it. Whereas property, nobody's knocking on your door every day and saying, I'll give you this amount today, I'll give you this amount today. And I think that if that happened, people would look at property very differently, because then they'd actually see that there are swings in the market. But knowing that property moves in cycles, looking through the cycle, hey, if we hold this, I mean, property in Australia for 40 years has done 10% per annum. So it's, yes, Victoria's done poorly recently, but is that going to continue? We don't know. With the existing government, lots of debt. There are lots of other things happening, but all else being equal, you would think that property in Victoria, in Australia, is going to keep appreciating in value. So it's holding, looking through, yes, it hasn't done a lot recently, hold it. We hold any growth assets you want to hold them for at least 10 years.
Yeah.
So looking through past I suppose, 6 months, 12 months, the negativity, and going, no, we know that property goes up over time, so let's make sure that we hold it through.
Yeah. Yeah, and have plans in place to be able to do so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then when it's time to sell, talk to their property advisor.
Yeah.
Craig Nickel from Nickel Buyers Advocacy. and you might say, hey, no, get out of this. This market's capped. Get out. It's tapped out. Get out of here. This is now a good one. I mean, we wouldn't encourage people to be doing that all the time. It's once you've held a property. So when someone's buying a house, we never say, our advice is not you hold it for 12 months and then you will flip it to make a profit, because it's very, very hard to do. And even when people do it well, you wonder, well, I mean, if they're doing renovations.
Whether it was just luck or not.
Well, well, if they're doing renovations and things like that. But remember that if you buy a house for $1 million and you sell it in 2 years for 1.2, you've got the holding costs of that period. You've got the stamp duty of 60 odd grand over that period. You've got the sale costs when you sell it of 20 odd thousand. So have you actually made, you think you've made 200 grand, but you haven't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So working all those things out, there's...
well, people love to work off the purchase price straight to the resale
I mean,
price.
when I sell a house, I'd be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Confirmation bias. Yes, I've made $200,000.
Yeah. Don't think of anything else. All right. Well, so the next one I had for you was about property investors. So they often face a dilemma of balancing growth with risk. So how do you typically advise clients to approach risk management with their property portfolios?
So cash flow again, because I suppose the risk, if you're looking long term, then it's not so much about the risk of the property. So if they've gone and if they engage someone like yourself, and you say, yep, I've got $850, I've got $1 million, I've got whatever you've got to spend, and you say, hey, I think this is a good area.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be, if the property goes down or that area market goes down in one or 2 years, I wouldn't be overly concerned, and I'd be encouraging my client as well that, hey, we're not looking at this as a 1 or 2 year investment. This is a 10-year investment.
Yeah.
So in terms of like that risk, I wouldn't be overly worried about. It's more probably cash flow risk again. So holding properties, cash flow is your risk. Really, it's expenses. Things can go wrong. Remember, investment properties, they need repairs. If you hold a property in Victoria, my lord, there are some expenses, some holding costs. So making sure that we've factored those in at the start and that we've got cash flow to cover those. It would be the most important thing.
Yeah, and a big one there would be vacancy rates, depending where the property is.
Yeah, so probably not a huge issue. Vacancy in Victoria, even around Australia, vacancy rates are pretty low. But hold a commercial property, that changes totally. But holding costs now are. It's expensive to hold residential property. Particularly in Victoria compared to other states. So that would be.
I feel that.
That would be how we try and manage risk, is making sure that they're considering those things.
Yeah.
And getting the loan structure right, obviously, is important. So,
the upfront. Yeah.
So if it's like a interest-only period, how long is the interest-only period for? Or it could be P&I. Why are we doing P&I? Is there any other debt that we need to move to interest-only? If this is your owner-occupied property, if it's investor, we'd probably always generally be recommending interest-only anyway. So.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, I had one big one for you last, was about real estate market and cycles. So how can a financial planner help clients recognise and prepare for downturns? And what are some of the specific steps you recommend to minimise these potential losses?
Don't sell. It's not a loss unless you sell. So you crystallise a loss. So there's holding good property and bad property as well. So sometimes the hardest thing is when you've bought a lemon of a property. Let's say it's off the plan apartment that you bought 10 years ago. You paid $700. You paid $500. Doesn't really matter what you paid.
Yeah. It
might not be worth that today. I think the hardest thing is selling that property sometimes. It's going, oh crap, this was about poor property. It's not done anything in 10 years. It's costing me a bomb. Generally OC fees. It's an apartment usually where that's the scenario. Cutting that property sometimes is the hardest thing. And I don't think a cycle is going to help that. Whereas you buy the right property, it's a much easier conversation. Yes, you're discussing the market's moved. Don't worry, we're not worried about, like we discussed before, 2 years. We're looking beyond that. Here, we use an index chart in the office, more for shares, but it's got property on there where it shows this is what property's done over the last 70 years, and you can see that it's not a straight line. It's volatile. So, and it's not as volatile as the share market, but it is still volatile. And there's down patches, but we always encourage people. We look at over a 10 or a 20-year period, and we say, look, we don't know what's going to happen in this section. And anyone that tells you that they do, they're lying. They don't know. We don't know what's going to happen over 1, 2, or 3 years, but we do know what happens over 10 and 20 years. And there's not a period where markets go backwards over that period. So it's encouraging that long-term outlook and not looking at what's in front of you. It's looking past beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if I'm going to ask you one final question, and it's a biggie, like for people just in general, so it doesn't have to be first-home buyers, but when it comes to financial planning, what is one of the biggest mistakes that you see people are making?
Well, the biggest mistake would be the off-the-plan apartments.
Yeah.
That would be,
for a property purchase.
For a property purchase, that'd be easily the mistake. If buying an apartment generally is not a great idea. Like we would always advise people to buy land, something with land. I've bought an apartment. I've made the mistake. I'm living proof. I've felt the pain. But it wasn't, thankfully, something in South Bank Docklands. That's probably the biggest mistake that you can make, I would say. Yeah, and I'm happy to be proved wrong. Yeah, it is a wealth killer. I'd happy to be proved wrong. It's not just the properties haven't moved a lot in value, and there's always supply coming on of that same property, which makes there's no scarcity. But it's also the holding cost of those. So you might have it's worth $500,000, and you're getting maybe maybe $2.5 a month. But it's the OC fees that come with that. It might even have a cladding issue that you've got to rectify. Like there's these other costs of which have just destroyed
insurance is continuing to shoot up.
Yeah. So that's probably the biggest mistake. And then also maybe on the flip side of that, it's a first home buyer. It feels like I'm kicking apartments, but a first home buyer buying an apartment for where they are today and not just thinking a little bit further. Maybe it's a villa or a townhouse or something where you've got the opportunity, if you're having a family, to grow a little bit in there rather than, oh my God, we've in an apartment, I've got a baby that's just started walking and I'm stuck in this apartment all day. I need to get out. I need a small backyard, something.
Yeah.
So
okay.
it's pitch. Yeah, probably at both ends. Would be.
Those are the big ones that you see.
I would say that those are the big ones. Yeah. So I mean, there's strategy things where when you're looking at where you buy a house, you pay down the house, you've done very well, tick of paying down the house. You're then like, great, I'm going to keep that and buy another one. You run into no offset account, and now you've got taxable income on the rent. That's
a bit of a planning issue.
That's a planning issue, but it's not. I mean, it's not as common, and that's a great mistake. It's a terrible problem, but it's a great problem to have because it means you've paid down one home. So, I mean, very, very rarely is that a problem, but yeah. So I'd probably say the biggest property mistake that people make is probably the apartment.
Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. So, seeing as you're on a property podcast, I just wanted to ask you, what are some of the benefits that people don't often think about when buying a home?
Buying a home particularly, I would say there's the non-cash. So non-cash benefits of buying a home. So most people, sweeping generalisation, most people's two biggest assets are their home, and super is catching up because people are working longer. The SG rate's now 11.5%, so people are getting more and more super. But generally, your biggest asset's your home. And if we look at people as a whole, super is not forced. The government has mandated your employer to pay for it. So your two biggest assets are things that you haven't actually made a conscious decision about. A, super, because the government have forced it. B, paying down your home loan, P&I, it's forced savings. So those are two benefits. So it's forced savings. And if you're not great at managing your cash flow, then that is a large benefit.
Yeah.
But the non-cash benefits, it's security of a roof over your head, owning your home. There's numerous studies about the emotional benefits of having a place to call home. So you get people that want to have the conversation of what's better between rent vesting and buying a home, and which do you prefer. Obviously, you get CGT benefits of buying your own home.
Yeah.
But it's not a cut and dry. I wouldn't say it's as rational as which is better. Because it's going to be different for each person. And if you said, if you looked at it purely financially and said, what is a better option, it would be probably rent as the cheaper house as possible.
Yeah.
But then you've also got to have the discipline for the money that you were going to be spending on the home to then invest that correctly in a good market, share market, imagine it'd be, consistently over a long period of time and hold that.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people they can't really do that over a long period of time. If you can, great, but there's not a lot of people that can. And then you look on the flip side, the non-cash benefit. It's a place to call home. You look at the government have just introduced the new, it's called the buyers scheme that just got passed in Parliament yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's for low-income earners they recognise the importance of a family home. You look at communities across Australia and the Australian government, having a place to call home is very, very important. It's got emotional security benefits, raising children in a place that is home. There's all non-cash. They're maybe not such tangible benefits, but they do come with other benefits, and you've got to consider those things as well when you're buying a home, particularly if you're looking at something like rent vesting, how long you're going to be doing that for, or buying a family home.
So there's lots of things to weigh up when making a decision for the home, but there's a lot of benefits.
Benefits on both. There's no right or wrong for anyone. It's it's not as clean cut as this is the best approach, because it's different for everyone. So
good. Well, I think that's been really good. Well, it's been good chatting with you, just to try and, I think, educate our listeners about how financial planning firstly is really important, but then how it actually plays into property specifically, but also other little bits and pieces to try and achieve the lifestyle.
We've got on our website, if anyone wants to jump on, we've got user guides there, so you can jump on and check out client guides. There's one specifically. There's one on superannuation. There's one on estate planning, insurance, but there's one specifically on the family home, and it talks about all those things that we've discussed today. So why you buy a home, location, the non-cash benefits that we just mentioned, other considerations. So that goes into more detail on the 2-car v 1-car and directing that money elsewhere. Obviously, lifestyle. There's other things that it talks about as well in terms of for those getting older, and maybe not so relevant for people our age that are going to have super, but the older generation and owning a home that it's not assessed for age pension purposes, which is if you've got $1 million home, that's a big win. Also, you can now access, there's the Home Equity Access Scheme where the government will allow you to get money out in like a reverse mortgage type scheme. So you can use, even though you've got a large property, you might be asset rich, you can use it to generate cash, which historically has been the big knock on a family home, that they're illiquid assets and you can't move them, but that's not so much the case anymore. So all of those, there's many reasons, and you can jump on and look at the client manual on the family home and why it's good, and I'm sure that you'll learn something on there.
Yeah, very good. Well, I'd like to thank you for coming on the podcast again.
Thank you.
It's been great having you as always. And for the listeners, that ends another episode of Property Ponderings. Hope you've gotten a few small tips there to try and help you build some wealth into the future. And if you do need to speak to Shane about financial planning, what's the best contact for you?
Website. You can jump on the website. There's a website inquiry. That'll come straight through and we'll get in touch.
What's the website?
huttonfinancial.com.au. HUTTON financial.com.au.
Very good. Okay, well, I've been the host here, so it's Craig Nicol from Nicol Buyer Advisory. Thanks for listening, and we'll chat to you next time.